Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Reckoning Live. It is good to see everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for what is sure to be a very lively discussion. So we're just going to jump right into it. First and foremost, just to introduce myself and my amazing panel that are here with us. My name is Johnnie Kornegay, and I am with CNP, Deputy Director for Strategy and Impact. Joining us this evening, we have Charles Stevens, Executive Director and Founder of CNP. We have Akeem Toure, Social Media Strategist and Founder of InCrowd. We have Dr. Deion Hawkins, Senior Editor for The Reckoning, and Dr. Ed Garnes, therapist, educator, sweet tea expert, joining us. And we are so excited about tonight's discussion. So first and foremost, Deion, we're going to start with you. You wrote an article for The Reckoning. It was called Sassy is the New Gay: How Language Perpetuates Veiled Homophobia. Oh, hold on one second. Pause. Really quick, y'all. If you're not following CNP, please do that. Please subscribe. If you could hear our voice, if you could see our faces, please subscribe. You can follow us at CNP Tribe everywhere on social media. Back to the program. Deion, you wrote an article for The Reckoning called Sassy is the New Gay: How Language Perpetuates Veiled Homophobia and Toxic Masculinity in the Black Community. And so I want to open us up there first. Can you talk to us a little bit about, one, what inspired this article, and talk us through a little bit about it, and that'll lead us into the core of tonight's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for convening this space for what I'm sure will be a lively conversation. So yeah, as Johnny said, I was the author of the article that we're talking about today, and I hope we can use it as a kind of a launching point. So the top of the article, it was inspired by seeing a tweet that now has 17 million views that said, "Men that cook are so sassy to me." And my mind was blown that something that you have to do to live your life would be considered sassy. But then what was not being said out loud is what is sassy and why sassy is bad, right? And so then I started to think about all of the other situations or other examples that I've heard that be used on social media. And it was sassy came up a lot, zesty came up a lot. And then I started to think, okay, well, wait a minute. What's really at the root of what's being said here, right? So in the article, it's like if Kevin Hart says "say it with your chest," there was no saying it with your chest, because at the root of it, if you really analyze it, it's really using sassy and zesty in place of calling something gay or feminine or then undesirable or not something you want in a partner. And so for me, I make kind of two arguments and then I'll open it up for other people's thoughts. Is first reason why this is really wrong is that, or toxic, is because it really creates impossible barriers or boundaries for, I think, Black men to navigate, right? So if you have a big argument or a big push for men to want to become more emotionally available, more intelligent, even things like cleanliness, tidiness, people were calling sassy and zesty. It makes it impossible for people to meet those parameters. And it's a it's a double-edged sword, right? Because on one hand, if I'm a Black man, I'm being called zesty for cooking. But then on the other hand, you may desire a man that cooks or is self-sufficient, right? Second thing is why it's toxic incredibly for me, how I feel like it impacts Black queer men, is that it excuses veiled homophobia, right? So it allows people to say sassy and zesty without saying that it's gay and why that's wrong. And then when you push back on it, right, you'll say, well, what do you mean by that? If you notice, people really can't answer it without it coming across as homophobic, because the root of it often is homophobic. And yeah, and in the article, there's a list of things there, how people dress, what they drink. And yeah, lots of things, and I'm sure that'll pop some discussion. So I will throw it open to the rest of the panel. Move Turbo.
Uh, I'll start by saying I thought it was probably the most interesting part is that comment came from a woman, a Black woman, and it kind of speaks to the first thing, how there's these impossible kind of boundaries for Black women to navigate. But I think just across the board, it really just confuses and conflates quality characteristics that women should be looking for anyway. So the call is coming from inside the house. Like it's not a good thing to kind of have all of these strict rules and things coming out, because it doesn't benefit women at all, in my opinion.
You know what's interesting, and I know that the words sassy, zesty, I've always, and every time I heard them, you know, I was actually hearing in my head the F word directly, because every time I've seen these words used, right, it's in this kind of antagonistic way where where I can look at them and see like, oh, you want to use the F word right now, but you can't. Right? So you're going to say sassy, you're going to say zesty to be able to say that. And I think, going back to what you said, Deion, it's kind of this undercurrent of gay as bad, you know, and that othering, that is my biggest issue with it. It's like, you can't find anything else to say about this person except that they're gay. Like, that's the problem. The problem isn't the customer service that they're giving you. The problem is that they're gay. Is that what you're saying? Like, so like I said, when I would hear these words sassy and zesty, I immediately in my head, I'm hearing the F word. So I don't know if folks feel that way, but that's what I hear.
I think there's definitely that element of using it in place of the F word. But I also think that it functions to police all Black men's sexuality and gender expression. Because I think even sometimes where it's applied, it's not just applied to refer specifically to gay men. It also refers to Black heterosexual identified men that are being a little too free or a little too expressive or a little too creative. And so it kind of functions to kind of put them in check. Like, you're getting a little too outside of you're moving too far outside of the expectations and the box that we put Black men into. So I'm going to use this word as a way to regulate you, to confine you, to again, like, try to keep you within this, because if you move outside, I'm gonna essentially openly question your sexual identity, right? And I think that, again, it's just this way that, I don't know, and maybe because we're in this unique moment where there's been, I think, I mean, I know that a lot of these things are kind of cyclical, but it does feel like we're in a moment where there have been more Black men across sexual lines of sexual identity that have been more willing to be affirming and supportive of, one, Black queer folks, and two, again, just willing to question it. And the minute that happens, it seems like there are these new rules that are put into place. So those are just some of the reactions I've had.
Yeah, I mean, all I could think about is it's so provocative, you know. Like, I like stuff that just gets up in me, and so, you know, Brother Hawkins, Brother Deion's article, it does that for me. But where I sit, you know, as a heterosexual brother, it's no different for me. How I show up as a Black man is problematic. Can I say the H word? Can I say hell? How I show up as a Black man is problematic to people in my circle and even my own family. So there are limited expressions for Black masculinity across the board. You know, so even though I may not identify as queer, I can be labeled queer. I remember some of the young things that I remember as far as labeling was, if you pee sitting down, so I'm supposed to potty train standing up, or that's gonna make me sassy. Or, you know, I can't cook with my grandmama and I can cook. Okay, so, you know, I'm sassy. I'll take that. Okay, you know, I can't cook with my grandma. So even as a heterosexual Black man, I had all of these display rules that I had to navigate. So even for me, how I show up is problematic because, number one, I don't fear my queer black male brothers. Y'all my brothers. I mean, we catching hell because we black men, so we got a lot in common, even though we're different. So even the display rules for heterosexual men, this article is still provocative in a way that labeling impacts all of us. And it's not only to weaponize, but it's also almost like a white supremacist critique that masculinity can only be this way. So it's also rooted in those display rules that we learn from white men. And whenever we have followed white men on anything in America, it's problematic. So I just want to, bring that to the occasion that, how I show up, very problematic for where I've taught, the things that I learned growing up in the black church. So I'm a rebel. I'm considered a rebel as well. So.
One of the things I'm wondering, Deion specifically, I zeroed in on your list of 20. I saw this on Facebook and I thought it was the craziest thing I had ever seen because, one, this is a joyous list. There are so many things on this list that just will. If you want a martini, brother, I think you should be able to have that martini. Our brother James Bond was ordering martinis, shaken not stirred, my entire childhood. I didn't know that was some symbol of that defined your masculinity to show up in a particular way. So I'm saying all that to say I'm looking at this as also policing like people's joy, like ability to enjoy things that make them as men feel good. And I feel like we should be going in the opposite direction and really just championing brothers finding joy however they can find it. If going to get a manicure and a pedicure every other week brings you joy and relaxes you, bruh, you need to be able to do that. And the people in our lives and in our community need to allow us to do that.
So thank you for saying this, because I think I want to echo something that I think is important that Akeem did touch on, is that I do think that this conversation or tweet is a little different if it was not from what is assumed or supposed a heterosexual black woman. Right? Because I think if that's the case, she is critiquing both black men, like heterosexual black men that would be her potential partners, but she's also condescending gay men that she may know in her life, right? Because then she has to then defend those gay men in her life. Well, why? What are you really trying to say? The other thing too that I think is important to highlight in this conversation is that all of us on this call wholeheartedly believe that toxic masculinity is a thing, right? And that there are a lot of people who embody those traits. However, I always tell my students, I think that for me, this conversation helps us understand how toxic masculinity is not just constructed by black men, and how we may not think about it in that way. And that sometimes even we as black gay men, right, we know that there are black gay men who people may say are too sassy or zesty for certain jobs, certain positions, right? And so this carries, I think, across the board. Yeah, I just think that that's important to note, of like where it came from, and then thinking about the impact of it too.
Can I ask a quick question? I want to bring in growing up. Like, so Sassy and Zesty, like I said, in my mind, these are just kind of evolutions of the way we've kind of talked about folks who were different, right? In some sort of way. We always found a way to talk about folks that are different. How have you unlearned some of that, right? Because that is like stuff that, because you get it when you're so young, it stays with you, and then we have to make conscious decisions to unlearn things, right? So I'm curious for whoever might want to chime in on this, like, how did you go about unlearning some of those traits, some of those toxic traits that you may have learned growing up?
I think it actually has a lot to do with where the comments come from themselves. It's education, it's experience, it's who's around you, who's your circle of influence, how much do they know, how much have they experienced, and that sounds kind of harsh to say, but typically if you're in certain spaces, you don't hear these words. You just kind of you understand there's a status quo, or there's a certain decorum, and people just kind of understand that speaking to others in a certain kind of way is just not tolerated. So if you go back home, in a lot of cases for us, you do hear those words, because those people, mind you, I said go back home. You left. You got out, you experienced things, you traveled the world, you learned things, and you went back and you heard those things. So again, I think without education, without knowledge, the people perish. And that's kind of what the symptom of some of this name calling could be labeled as. And another one that's kind of adjacent is corny. What does corny mean? You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't own a gun, you don't fight, you don't, you know what I mean? Like, those sound like pretty good characteristics to me for somebody, doing well for themselves in this day and age. But if you are those things, if you're more straight-laced, if you speak, proper English, you're labeled as corny. And I think that it just kind of speaks to toxic choice, if you will. And doesn't really put us in a good place as a people.
For me, I think it has always been having conversations in circles with friends and just learning, to be honest, because I think that as Black men, many of us grew up socialized with a monolithic idea of what a Black man was, and that was a very explicit. It was very big parameters. Most of it was straight. It looks a certain way, and so for a lot of Black queer men in particular, it may be a lifelong process of unlearning that. I think that for a lot of people, I think Black queer men sometimes are forced to interrogate that process, where a lot of maybe the Black straight community is not. And so for me, I think it's being willing to have conversations. And also, I tell people this all the time too: be willing to just say, okay, I was wrong. You know what? In retrospect, okay, I was wrong, and I realized why that was a problematic conversation. Because like I said, the tweet has 17 million views. Now, the gag is that 2 years ago, she tweeted that men that cook are so attractive to me. Now that tweet is magically taken down now. I checked before I came on the live stream, right? But the other one is 17 million views, calling men sassy are. And so even if you look at the Twitter thread, right? There were conversations being had about, like, okay, wait a minute, like what are we talking about here? And like we're gonna do humor, because people then saying, like, this is how I'm gonna show up at our date, then it was a skeleton. And then or it was like waiting for you, my zesty ass waiting to go on the date, and it was like a skeleton looking out of of the window. And so I think that there's just, social media does grant us opportunities to have these discussions if people are willing to look at them as that, and interrogate their beliefs as well. Because we're not all perfect and there's all grace. And I think that this was a textbook example of that being true.
I mean, I think that wouldn't say that I've necessarily unlearned those things. I think if anything, I'm if I'm honest, I'm probably more ambivalent. I mean, I think it's a constant struggle of unlearning. I don't know that, though I think that there have been some queer men that have been on the vanguard of questioning patriarchal notions of masculinity. I mean, there are also queer sexual cultures in particular that, I mean, where people sometimes, even in queer communities, pick their friends in social groups based on allegiance and adherence and conformity to masculinity. So I don't want it to be like, oh, all the straight men have it wrong and all the queer men are all evolved. I mean, I think I see struggle and interrogation and ambivalence on all quarters. I think certainly some are more, some have come further, but I don't know. Like, I do wonder, like, what it means as we embark on Black Pride season. And I don't know if the there's still the sort of no fats, no femmes, masculinist politics of desire that used to be quite persistent in those realms. I don't know if that's still a thing, but I know for a long time that was kind of a thing. And so I don't know. Like, I think that we have to be honest about our own allegiance to masculinity. And I, even though we don't use words like sassy and zesty, especially as queer men, I mean, I think there's also policing certainly around sexual roles. Who can be a top and who doesn't get to be a top, for example. But that's a whole nother thing. But I just wanted to like weigh in with that.
Go ahead.
Is it though? Is it the whole other thing? Like if someone says that person's too zesty or sassy to be a top, that's pretty much, I mean, it's still stemming from like a toxic masculine place, right? So it's like it is different, yes, but I would agree that I think this very much so manifests itself. I don't think we use those words.
Or if you're like, well, I guess we're getting into CMP After Dark here. But if you have a certain build and if you have a certain expression of masculinity and you say you like a particular sexual act, how are you received in queer communities? Do people lose respect for you? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying, I mean, obviously that's problematic. That's completely problematic. But I've been in spaces where that's been the case. And I'm like, do we tell the truth about that too?
You know what's interesting about that is one of the things I've been excited to see, I guess, in the 2010s is kind of the blossoming of Black male sexuality across sexual orientations, right? And we see that same kind of policing that Deion is talking about, just like across. But that goes back to joy again too. It's like, baby, get out of people's situations and let them enjoy what they want to enjoy, right? I think it all comes from the same place. I think I agree with that. I think we take it and kind of use it as it relates to how people show up in the bedroom, etc. In the exact same way. We just don't use the same words.
Yeah, I think for me, how I learned and unlearned was that even though we had these strong masculine identities that you had to achieve in my family, I think my ignorance in being young and loving people that were my family members at a young age that I had no idea they would be labeled sassy to this day, that identified in that way, I never grew up seeing it as a problem or something to be shunned. So I think my naivete growing up, I love these people. So they're my family. So if they are different, I still love them. And then, having a mother and a grandmother who never made me feel like I had to choose certain roles. I remember my mother had a brother by the name of David Searcy. I thought he was James Baldwin. Okay, he looked like Baldwin. He crossed his legs like Baldwin. I thought this brother was Baldwin. It was just so amazing to me. It wasn't until I got to like middle school and everybody was like, "Oh, he's you like Baldwin?" I didn't know it was a thing. So, I think social learning for me was I had enough models that went against traditional notions of masculinity that I never saw it as a thing. It did not become a thing until I got older, and really where the homophobia showed up in my life very young was playing sports. That's where it showed up for me. Like one of my cousins came to a game and everybody was like, "Oh my God." I mean, it was this big thing. And I'm like, that's my cousin. I mean, it wasn't a big thing to me, but sports really, I had to navigate certain choices because I started to see how I show up as a heterosexual brother is a little bit different. And so I had to make choices. And what I leaned into is that, people in my family identify this way. I was not taught to hate. So I always came from a place of a different level of understanding and compassion than I think a lot of brothers. My family is not everyone. I can tell you as a therapist, I'm learning, it was a special time. Okay. It was a special time because Because one of the things that is so tricky for me as a therapist and also fascinating is that even the queer brothers that I counsel still get trapped in these notions of toxic masculinity on how they feel they have to show up even in romantic relationships. Like they feel that you have to argue, there has to be violence to prove a point. So even as a therapist, I'm constantly undoing, learning new things, unlearning when I'm working with brothers of all gender expressions that get caught up in having to choose a role for social respectability.
And there's a lot to that. I think uh, this is a lot larger and a lot deeper and goes back a lot farther than any of us can fathom. If we're talking about, you know, cavemen and cave women, having to react and live around one another and figure out what that's like, just based on not having language, based on I'm bigger than you, you're smaller than me type of things. If we're talking about, why somebody with a certain build isn't necessarily thought of in a certain position, that's visual. It's not necessarily something that I think we just came up with. I think it definitely comes from something that's very simple. It's 1 + 1 = 2. But I think as we evolve as human beings and we unlearn and learn different things, sometimes we learn that sometimes 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. Sometimes it equals 3, right? So that went over y'all head. Um, but I think that it's just one of those things where culture has to catch up. Culture has to catch up. And I see the younger generation literally catching up before my eyes. Like, they're the ones that have no issues. And I won't say all of them, but they're the ones that have no issues saying, that's my gay cousin, or that's my gay friend, or that's my gay best friend. Whereas, growing up, that wasn't something that happened. You didn't stand up for your gay best friend. You might have known he was gay, but you didn't want him to tell anybody. And I just think that speaks volumes to where we've come, what they've learned, what we've been able to pass down, the things we've endured as a generation, the fights and the struggles that we went through so that they could run through doors and walk through doors that we weren't able to. It just, the freedom fight continues. And I think that some of the results of that is what we're seeing in some of the younger generation.
I'm like looking at this list that Deion has, the Zesty list in the article, and I guess it is kind of like the gay Willie Lynch letter, because it's so ridiculous. It's like having too many male friends, not having enough male friends, watching reality shows, and I'm like, what did the gay Willie Lynch is this doing? Because it's so completely ridiculous. But I do wonder on some level that I don't know. Like I do think that I think that there's some. What am I trying to say? I think that we still hold on. The reason why it's the Zesty, Sassy, all this stuff has so much currency is because I do think that it connects to some core belief that people still hold that maybe isn't rational. Obviously, it's not rational, right? So the question is, well, how do you get it? Because it's not just a rational unlearning of these things. There's something very core, very primal that people connect to. And so, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you undo this very deep programming?
So can I say something? Because I write about this in the article. For me, I tell people, start asking people, what do you mean by that? Make people stand on what they have to say. I'm not connecting the dots. What do you mean by that? And why is it a problem? Right? Oh, okay. Men that cook are sassy. Our response would have been, okay, what do you mean by that? And why is that a problem? Right? Own it, right? Because then if you can own it, or then we have that conversation, that can be the route to, another conversation of growth. But if people don't own what that is in place of, to me that starts to become difficult, right? Because then you think it's justified as long as you're not saying the F word. You think it's justified as long as you're not calling someone gay, but the implications of it to me are still there. And I would go ahead, Charles.
Is it that people are just making? Can you just not take a joke? Who was a comedian that said you can take a dick but you can't take a joke? Who said that?
See, but I think that's the thing, is I think that the Black community takes lots of offensive jokes. Like, I don't think that we are a community that lacks the ability to understand when something is funny, even if it's racist or problematic. I've talked about this before, right? Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy have some of blatantly homophobic stand-up, but there's still tons of people, gay men included, right, that will watch that and find it humorous, right? And so I don't
Well,
think
I think we need to rewatch it though, just in context of Eddie Murphy wearing extremely tight leather pants, telling these jokes. I mean, I'm not into calling people sassy and zesty, but those other pants were very sassy.
they
Well,
were
not back then.
okay.
Back then, the tighter the pants, the better.
Right. Akeem, you took the words right out of my mouth. That is absolutely a period of time.
I think old people tell us that, but leather pants were always sassy. Like, they were never not sassy. I don't want to hear it.
But I think the other thing too is, and just staying with this Eddie Murphy real quick, is I loved kind of his evolution, where it was just like, I remember him saying a couple of years ago, like, he's looked back at some of his old stand-up and been like, I wouldn't say that today, right? But he was like 21, 22. You know, I think the beauty is, the hope is people, going back to Akeem's original point, live long enough, meet enough people, interact with folks, that people have the room to like grow out of some of the things and realize like, oh, that was a problem, right? But that takes support from the people that are kind of in their immediate circles. And it also takes a willingness. I think the people that are willing, in my experience, let me say that differently. In my experience, the people that kind of take those leaps do evolve. Like, I'm gonna, when I think of my dad, I remember having to rewire him out of the F word. But I literally had to stay on him about it. Like, every time. And here's the thing, like, when he said the thing, it did not enter me in a hurtful way, because he would be like referring to a thing and I'm like, yes, see, we don't use that word, or I would say some version of that, right? Because I was already out and he knew.
What was he calling? Was he calling inanimate objects the F? Like, what was
No, he's talking about people and experiences and things and all of the above, right?
So and that's just people, like, inexperience was the F word. Like, I guess I'm very curious about.
It would typically, you know, who knows what the scenario was, right? But I remember, and I'm saying all that to say, is I remember there was one time where he self-corrected. Like, I watched him about to say the thing and he didn't say it. He replaced the F word with homosexual. And I'm like, you know what? We have arrived. He has done the work. He has arrived finally at the place where that's not the word.
Well, but you know, part of the argument is that the F word for them doesn't always mean a gay man. Sometimes the F word means these other things too. I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying that that's the argument they would say. They would say it's not, you know, they would say a straight man could be the F word if he meets, if they review the gay Willie Lynch letter and he adheres to the things.
Well, and I mean, that is absolutely, I mean, I think people can make that argument. Obviously, it still comes from a homophobic place, right?
So, like, even looking at something like, you know, like the infamous story of Damon Wayans, and I guess we're kind of veering a little bit, getting kicked off the Saturday Night Live. You know, he was supposed to be a cop in the skit, and he decided to make the cop a gay, it's very like cliche gay dude. Y'all never heard
I
this?
haven't heard this story.
Y'all never heard the story how Damon Wayans got fired off of SNL? So basically, he tried to what was it, Antoine? He tried to do Men on Film on SNL, and he tied the shirt. He was wearing a police shirt. He unbuttoned it and tied it up in a knot in the middle, and did and he did it for laughs. They fired him from SNL. I don't even think it was because he was doing this homophobic gay thing, but because he didn't stick to the script.
Right.
Or maybe, I don't know. But it's interesting. I think it's less. Did these comics evolve, or was it the audiences evolve? So obviously, so something like Men on Film, the In Living Color skit
couldn't work today.
Well, I don't even know. Well, people laugh at it today. So when he used to do it, they would get like this huge laughter from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And something like that play, perhaps not. So it's curious to me how. But even with all of that, so even if we wouldn't laugh at Eddie Murphy playing, because he also did, I think there was like the gay cop skit, where he was like, "What would a gay cop be?" Like, it started making the siren noises.
Mm-hmm.
To Men on Film in Living Color and all these other things. So even though that's not funny anymore, but then there's this sort of like, zesty, sassy stuff that still works. So it's just weird how like some things are out, some things are less useful, but then these other things that are still quite persistent.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, the reality is, especially in our current moment, everybody's looking for a quip. Everybody's looking for like, a thing that they can say to get the reaction. Because in thinking of that, right, the kind of the evolution of the No Diddy as in the same line, right? We've talked about Sassy, we've talked about Zesty, No Diddy cropped up. And I thought that was pause and no homo, I thought were weird. Like, I literally was like, I don't understand how y'all are having full conversations and you say something that's not really queer at all and you're still like, pause. Like, I don't, what?
What's the person that they check themselves for any hint of intimacy or affirmation? So I can't affirm you as a black man. I can't affirm you as another black man unless I do this whole like, what was
I love you, no homo. What? Just I love you. You can just love me. It's okay.
But then it's dangerous, perhaps, for black men to love each other. And so I have to self-correct because how dare you?
It's also dangerous for straight men that are moonlighting. It's also dangerous for them because they play this game with themselves. We know about homophobia in hip hop, but part of the no pause thing from a therapist standpoint that I look at, most of the time when you have to announce something, you are struggling with that something. So I also see like no pause and no homo as a way of you actually announcing that you identify in other ways and you're uncomfortable with the notion that you're struggling within yourself.
Oh, that's
we're not ready for that.
We're not ready for that.
That's a whole identity development thing. But go ahead.
Do you think that that requires that person being consciously aware of that, right? Like they could do that subconsciously and not know that it's coming from likely a place of.
I think it's a both and. I think some it spills out subconsciously, but I also think because of the display rules in hip hop that the no pause movement also comes from people not wanting to be outed for being actually identifying outside of heteronormativity. So I think that it's a both and, And then what I was going to say, too, what Sassy, Zesty, and No Diddy do also, black folks absent of power are always looking to other and have one up on other black folks. So when you don't have power, you end up using power in ways to say, I gotcha, you're sassy, I'm straight. You know what I'm saying? So we also in this whole psychological dynamic of white supremacy, we're also searching for something that makes us better than the next,
That.
But
man.
So I get that argument overall, but in the tweet, I don't think would be an example of that, right? So like, because it's just, so I would say that, to me, that would make a little more sense if it were a Black woman tweeting directly to a gay man, right? Using, let's say, sexuality as privilege, or a Black straight man commenting on a video of a gay man cooking, being like, "Oh, this is zesty, zesty AF," something like that. But I think for it to come from, for it to be, for me, first of all, that it's cooking. I just don't want us to lose sight of how insane.
No, but no one believes that cooking is zesty. Like, no one believes that. Like, that is the biggest. Not even the biggest.
Actually, Charles,
no one believes that we gay.
I think some people do. I think it's ridiculous.
Charles, there are absolutely people who, or okay, this is what I tell people too, how things manifest, got to hold all accountable, right? So some men may not have even grew up around the kitchen, period, right? They may not have had to grow up with those skills. The women in their family, their sisters may have been the people doing those things, right? And so if I'm socialized to believe that, and people around me are saying it's sassy to learn how to cook, why would I learn how to cook?
No one believes it's sassy to learn. No, I don't believe anybody believes that. Like, I don't accept.
Why would you? Why would you believe that though?
Like, I mean, I do think that people think things are sassy. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like, clearly, there's nothing.
That's how we ended up with Trump as president.
I was just about to say the ridiculous is real.
That is quite a leap, and that is not.
Charles, I have to be. There are absolutely.
I guess what I'm saying is, I think she was probably doing it for clout, and I think what we haven't talked about is that we're in this moment where people say completely ridiculous things just because they think it will make for clout. Like, that's the moment we're in.
See, but okay, yes, and so. But that would not have received 17 million views if there was not some inkling of truth or something that could have virality, right? People tweet absurd, outrageous things on a daily basis, right? For seeking that, right? Seeking purposeful, going viral, that sort of thing. So I don't disagree with that, Charles. But I think for something to receive 17 million views, and I mean, the thread is still going, right? I think that, to me, was clearly at the root of something. And again, I also want to be clear. I think, for example, people would not call a man's ability to grill zesty.
Not at all. That would be a sign of masculinity.
Exactly. But I think if people say that a man is sitting there chopping fruits and vegetables and cooking for his family of 6 every night, they'd be like, okay, that may be a little odd.
That's so.
I think that I need first person testimony. Y'all need some.
Okay, as a person,
I need some more people. I literally need 10 straight people to come up on this show and be like, "I think the cooking is gay, and this is why." I don't believe it. I don't believe that people are that stupid. Like, I'm not saying. I think that tight pants, sure. Pink car, sure. Riding in an air balloon, sure. I mean, there are definitely things that people might think that are zesty.
But why though? Because we know cooking is tied to femininity. So why would it be a stretch for people to say that it's sassy to cook?
It's not the 1950s. I don't even know if we associate cooking.
It's still
I don't know. I don't know.
I am a cooker in my family. People have question marks because I can throw down in the kitchen, but I was raised along with my parents, with my grandmother.
So someone said to you, "You're zesty." I mean, you probably say they probably have more questions about you getting a PhD. I feel like that's more. No. Like, how dare you get a PhD as a Black man?
Cooking, because what is it associated, especially in the South? So think about Mississippi, South Georgia, and I'm a man that can throw down in the kitchen in a time frame, and still now in Mississippi and South Georgia, very strict gender roles. Because I cook, I remember. I give you a perfect example. You want a real one?
One example.
I cooked for Mother's Day, and you would have thought that
you're a father. Of course you cook
that
for
there's
Mother's
something about the chicken, the stuff I made that is zest all in it. Because people had problems with the fact that I cook for family members on Mother's Day.
So you
I
as a
commit
son,
crime.
as a son and a husband, you cook for Mother's Day, and that, I mean, isn't that what you're? I feel like men cook on. Isn't that like a thing? Like, I don't know. Maybe I
No.
watch too much.
Charles, I'm with Ed here.
That stupid. I just can't believe it. Like
Charles, when I think about, to that point, growing up, even though I grew up in the North, I spent a lot of time with family in the South. We would go to the South, North Carolina, child, Eastern, rural, baby. There's one stoplight in the town that my dad grew up in. And there was a dividing line in how men cooked. So the men, there were kind of some rituals that they had. So the men would make this fish stew, but what made it real manly is they would cook it outside in a big iron pot. And they would sit around and they would drink beer and they would cook this fish stew and they would eat the stew together. It was a whole bonding experience among the men, right? When it was grill time, the men would be outside doing the grilling and the smoking, and then inside, Auntie and everybody would be in there kind of doing all the other stuff, the fixins, the salads, the da-da-da-da-da. So like unconsciously, you're getting fed. Men cook outside, and that's okay. Women cook in the kitchen, and that's the way that works. So when you start blending those two together, to Ed's earlier point, people start to like, I don't know.
Black communities have always been. When I was growing up, most Black families. I mean, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked. So I had but my dad also cooked. Well, he didn't cook for me because I ain't like he could cook, but he still cooks sometimes. I didn't eat it, but whatever. That's a whole other thing. But I'm like, I knew a lot of families where the mom and the dad both worked. I knew even some of these traditional roles that people attribute to Black, like, Black folks are so like whatever. I don't know. Like, I feel like there's always been Black families where the mom worked and the dad worked, and the dad picked up the kids. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe.
But can I? Okay, but I don't think okay, but hold on, because no, I ain't gonna go there. Okay, because some people find some aspects of child rearing inherently feminine, but that's a whole other. I don't think that they call it sassy or zesty, though. I think it's different. I don't think that they will say that it's gay to be actively parenting. If they would say it's more feminine, right? But I just want to highlight something, though, Charles. It could be that your family constructed the space where those were not read as sassy or zesty, right? So like they're married. So they likely may have had an understanding or an alignment of values. My guess is, no shade, homegirl that put that tweet out, my guess is not married, right? So I think that some of these people, if you are in the relationship, or I shouldn't even say that, in a relationship, whatever it is, right? I think that if we have lots of examples of successful Black families, Black relationships where there may be a 50-50 split, or a father, very hands-on, etc. I think those are examples of what we're saying, what happens when the work could be done, where people are like, check the BS at the door. Like, excuse me, we gonna have to have some real conversations in here. It's okay if you cook, child rearing, cleaning. I'm not about to be the only one walking around here, being Susie Homemaker. And I think that's important to highlight. And also, sorry if that girl is married or in a relationship. I wish you love this.
And sassy is such a gay word. I'm pretty sure a gay person invented the word sassy and zesty. Like, it doesn't sound like something.
It sounds like a gay. Like it sound like.
Is her account? Is it a gay dude that's behind her account? Like that? I don't even know if this is a real person. Like, is there actually footage of this person with 20 million views on their tweet? Because I'm just like, who? I mean, gays call things sad. I mean, didn't the white gays invent sad? Like, I don't even know where. Can someone trace the evolution of the word sassy?
But we don't use it the same way. Or
I think maybe they got confused because we started letting straight people use words like "what's the tea" and things like that, and then it just got confused. It just went from like
it evolved all the way to sassy. But I think
sassy.
Ed, I want to actually ask you a question because Deion, you talked about something when we talk about child rearing. So you're a dad, father of a black son. How are you or how do you raise your son to not see these things in these rigid ways, like really have not be homophobic, not be transphobic? Like, what is that process like for you, for your son?
Well, I thought I sipped revolutionary tea before, but the most revolutionary thing that I'm finding you can do as a black man is to raise an open minded, loving, and emotionally available black child in 2024. I have heard everything from you gonna make the boy gay. I've heard everything from he's touched, but I think you have interacted with Ellison. My son is a very emotional, available, intelligent young man. And I had a scenario that I don't even know if I shared with you all. So we were watching something on television, and it wasn't because it was two brothers in an intimate moment. It was kind of explicit. So no matter what the expression would have been, it would have been inappropriate. And my son said, "Daddy, you don't have to turn." I said, what are you talking about, Ellis? I said, "I'm trying to watch the game." He said, "No, it was LGBTQ, and that's why you turned." I was like, "You five? What?" And so that led me to say, I must be doing something right if my son can articulate my values back to me. So, I think that, children are always more resilient than we think, but it's difficult, man. I mean, like I catch more flack from my own family. I get applause outside of my family, but I mean, my family does not agree with raising an emotionally available black child. I mean, I catch a lot of hell but I look at the results. I know everything that's going on. Ellison's is Dean's List every year. I think he's gotten 2 B's in his 9-year-old world. Right. I look at how he treats other people. I look at how he handles difference. I look at how he negotiates different spaces. I look at how he respects people's values and morals that are different than him. So I think we're doing a bang up job over here. But I have to tell you that it is difficult. It is difficult because everyone is not down with it. And so if you have issues in your own masculinity, you're definitely going to have an issue with how I'm raising Ellison. But also I go back to social learning. So if my friends identify across the spectrum of sexual identity and he's constantly been exposed, Mashawn Simon, our CMP brother, did Ellison's blessing. And if that ain't something to make somebody throw a southern pork chop at you, so we was brought up in a space that's different. You know what I'm saying? Everybody would say you cannot have a queer brother blessing a black child. So I mean, he started off, defying the norms, but he doesn't see it as different. I mean, he can tell you all about Zordnia Hurston, and he doesn't have the words outside of the male gender, but he was like, she likes those girls. That's who he calls Zordnia Hurston, right? So I mean, I think that we're doing a good job because I see that when he experiences difficulty in life, he has a language to articulate his emotions in ways that's going to prepare him for the world. No matter how he identifies, he is comfortable with emotions. He's comfortable expressing that. And even when he's forced by peers to make certain choices, he holds true to his value. So I think that I'm doing a great job, but does it keep me up at night? Yes, a lot of sweet tea on some of the decisions that you have to make. Because J. Ray and I talked about, because Ellison is very open, there are choices in certain social spaces that we have to make and have conversations that you can't do certain things in our house in these spaces. Those are the difficult moments for me, John. I think I mentioned to you at his school and other places that he has to navigate as a 9-year-old, letting him know these spaces are not as friendly to our queer brothers as what we are in our house. And those are some difficult conversations.
And so that first of all, I hope that people were tuned in to listen to that, because I think that that is, first of all, an amazing, because I think that you are, just give you your kudos, because I think you are showing what intentional reflection and like breaking down of toxic masculinity looks like. And I can't imagine that's any more difficult of a situation than doing it with a child. But and I just want to highlight, because Akeem said this at the beginning, because I know we have to like wrap up soon, is that something like emotional intelligence, right, should be a quality or trait that we desire, even if it is feminine. That, okay, that is also the thing that I want to be clear here, right? So if we were to say men who cook are feminine, so what? Right? We just should own that there are likely going to be feminine qualities in men, whether that be heterosexual, homosexual, whatever on the spectrum, and right, that there may be masculine qualities in black women, and we could go at length about why that has existed, right? And so I think that for me, that's important to highlight, is that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about are desirable traits, many things that people articulate they want out of a partner or out of someone long term. But then also, it's like, even if these are sassy or zesty, so what?
Can I ask a
Like,
question for folks that are in the dating apps world? When you look at profiles on the dating apps world, or say Black Gay Pride was just weekend in Washington D.C., did any of the popular boys have T-shirts on that said "I'm a great cook"? Well, yeah, I'll just leave it there. I won't go crazy. Like when you look at profiles where people say, "I can really bake a really great cake," and so I do wonder, like, what am I trying to get at? What I'm trying to get at is, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the perhaps there isn't the social currency. Maybe there's more social currency to being the opposite of things that we say we value.
I will say, in a Southern household, imagine baking chicken and not frying it, and that being a problem with your masculinity. So it's that
Wait a minute,
deep.
you are not telling me that
It's a thing.
yeah,
It is a
you're
thing.
masculine to.
It is a baked chicken. Is Deion can back me up. It's
yeah.
viewed as feminine.
Nope, I don't believe that. I absolutely don't believe. I don't believe it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Deion.
Or you'll notice, so I talked to people when I was doing this article. So what a lot of people would say, it's like, or I know how to make one or two dishes very well, right? Like that, like me, like a lot of black men are like, I have a go-to, either like that I make for myself or something I'm comfortable doing, or like on the grill. But I certain things, like again, I'm not trying to be certain types of people going vegan. Some people were
Wait,
like, okay,
is vegan sassy? Is it more like, is that sassy too?
could be. People think it could be.
What I feel like all of this surmises to is limits. Like, you can't cook. What? That's a limit. You
Is it like
can't.
asking someone if they're top or bottom? If you ask, "Can you cook?" Is that like a way that?
That's the flex. Like, that's what I want to know. Can you cook?
I think that if you have something like that on your dating, I'm not in the dating profile world, but if you have something like that on your profile, that's a plus. That means that's a characteristic, because I love to eat. So if you could cook, that's great. I don't understand, and I think that it
Oh,
comes
someone unlocks
back.
a private pic. It's like a picture of the food they cook. It's like a meal.
Now, see, we don't need that under
I
we
know.
don't need that behind the private wall. We don't need your mac and cheese back there.
As the church brothers would say, Charles is running out. but to Dion's point, I mean, it you'll be surprised, Charles, on the decisions that people make. On how they identify certain things. I think that definitely in the South, man, what dishes you make.
See, I feel like we might argue about this. I feel like I've always thought in the South, like I was like, okay, y'all really gonna be mad at me, because I've always felt up northern. It seems to me that northern people have always seemed a little bit more adherent to traditional masculinity than down south.
Mm.
Okay, so
like all those beards and all that stuff y'all do up north. Like they always
The Timbs.
but here's the so here's the thing, and this is, and I can only speak from the family I grew up in my experience.
and in Philly, which is like the
Right.
national headquarters for toxic masculinity.
You know, one of the biggest masjids is here in my city, or, you know, a very small city. Anyway, where I was going is I've always felt, and really now, but I've always felt, even when I was a kid, that the men who raised me were protecting me too. They knew. They had to know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I felt like, so I don't think that it was true in my experience. Like, those brothers, my uncles, were really looking out for me. You know what I'm saying? And wanted me. They tell me that they love me. They told me that they loved me when I was a kid. And so in their own way, they were also modeling, like Ed said, they didn't have the language and the methods that Ed has, but they always did it in their own way. I remember having every New Year's Day, we would have dinner at my grandfather's house. My grandfather's a Baptist minister. Go with that where you will. But my grandfather was also just like, he wasn't always a Baptist minister. That's what I'm saying. He was worldly. So I remember one New Year's Day. So everybody, random family would stop by, and this one New Year's, Cousin Ronald came by. Now, Cousin Ronald was the kids, okay? And I knew it as a kid, and it was the coolest thing. I knew my grandfather was safe because watching him interact with my cousin Ronald made everything okay. Him and my cousin Ronald were cutting up at that dinner table, telling stories, doing the thing about when they grew up, da 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 da. And so it was at that point that I also realized that my grandfather was safe too. Like, I already knew that I had my uncles. My dad was always good, even though, you know, even though there were times when I didn't know, I still knew because my dad told me he loved me every day. But I also figured out that my grandfather was good too. So in my experience growing up in the North, the black men that I grew up around, didn't have all this language, but they loved me. And I've been gay.
And yeah, I just may just fundamentally disagree. I think that I think that I do agree that if we think about major East Coast cities, what do people argue as attractive? It is very textbook, cookie cutter, toxic masculine. DC, you can take, oh Lord, I forgot where I was. You could take somebody from DC, New York, and you could be like Philly. Sometimes it'll be the you know, they'll be fine regardless. So I think that is true about that, but I'm not sure if I would say that it is true about socialization of masculinity in terms of traits and qualities and things like that, outside of like look. But I would agree that I think the East Coast and like Northeast in particular still has an obsession with toxic masculinity and gay culture that I don't think is as prevalent in the South. But I think if we're thinking about overall, like where constructions of masculinity come from, I do think a lot of it is still, especially Black folks, is still rooted in the South.
Gentlemen, well, before we wrap up, any final thoughts before we wrap up and close out tonight's conversation?
You know what, Deion and everybody had me thinking about tonight. Isn't it funny how what we need for our psychological survival and just our physical survival as Black people is labeled sassy? Emotional availability, what you need to have psychological balance and to be able to compete in this world with your righteous mind, that's sassy, okay? The ability to cook, you have to have sustenance, you know what I'm saying? But that is sassy, you know? It's amazing to me how we how we do gender, especially here in America, because these are essential qualities. And to Deion's point, you would probably want in a husband.
You know what they
You would
say?
want somebody can raise them kids. You would want somebody that can cook. You would want somebody that can clean and know how to mop a floor. That's gonna help you out. Okay, so
surviving is gay. Surviving is
exactly.
really, really gay. What's really, really zesty is surviving.
I mean, sustenance and sassy needs to be our next thing. So that's what's intriguing to me, is that survival skills, things that we need for psychological balance as Black people, is labeled sassy. It's just interesting.
There is an agenda.
It's like the gay Willie Lynch letter.
There is an agenda
If you
to
want to control
have
a
us
black
limit ourselves, not love ourselves, not elevate ourselves, not teach ourselves. It is an agenda. I don't know who started it. I don't know who propagates it. Social media propagates it. Maybe it's our own doing.
Now that he was talking, we're gonna have to get into a humiliation rituals being real and all that, because I think there's a connection between humiliation rituals and zesty and sassy. But we'll do that next episode.
Listen, y'all. Deion, you have anything you want to wrap us up with?
No, I'm good. Thank y'all so much for the lively conversation.
Thank you all so much for the lively conversation as well. Thanks to everyone that was able to tune in live. Gentlemen, appreciate you so much. For those of you that are still with us, make sure that you subscribe to CMP. Hit the subscribe button wherever you are tuning in. Also, make sure that you follow us on social media at CMP Tribe. Do us a solid, visit the website, thecounternarrative.org, and join our mailing list so you can stay connected to all things CMP. You can check out Dr. Deion Hawkinson's article, as well as other amazing articles and videos and podcasts at thereckoningmag.com. Appreciate y'all, and we'll see you next time, y'all. Peace.